Hi everyone, this is just a brief guide and bit of direction on your EE reflections. So you'll be coming up to writing your first EE reflection over the next week or so, and this is going to be a key part of your extended essay process. So your reflections contribute 6 marks to your total score, and that's fairly significant. Your total marks are out of 34, so 6 is not a small portion of that. So it's really important that you think about the content of the reflections because you don't have many words available to you to get your point across. So this video is just going to provide a little bit of guidance on what might make a good reflection versus a not so great reflection. So while you're watching this, you don't need to take a ton of notes, maybe just a few on the key ideas. But later, when you've forgotten everything you've heard, rather than having to re-watch the video, I've also shared these slides with you. And if you open the slides, when you go to this instructions for use page, you can just jump to the section that you most need to know about, okay? So just to make it nice and easy, if you have questions, my email is down the bottom of the screen. Let's get started. So we're doing this because I want you to feel comfortable writing your reflections this year, okay? I want you to feel like this is something that is straightforward and easy to do. Lots of students really worry about the reflections because it's not something you kind of really edit and go back to, and it's just you write it, it goes in, and it's done. Gets signed off, and apart from the odd little edit, that's pretty much the process. So if you are worried about it, talk to your supervisor. If they can't answer your questions, talk to me. But just remember that this is a reflection. So there is an element of this that it's personal, okay? It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be grammatically amazing, although at least please consider spelling. But I just want you to feel comfortable knowing what these are actually looking for. So let's talk about the basics. This is the stuff you have to know. If you forget this, come back to the basics. So there is a word limit. It is 500 words in total, okay? So 500 words, and that is it. Now, there is a form. The form you are not going to use. You are going to enter your reflections straight into Manage Back. But I've linked the form here so you can see what the whole document will look like. Manage Back will not let you extend past your 500 words, okay? So just keep that in mind, and it will show you roughly where your word limits are. So as you enter your reflection, it will tell you how much you've got left. In terms of timing, you'll do your first one about now, okay? The second one will happen in August for most of you. It is possible to do it before the break, and that's a conversation to have with your supervisor. And this is a really important thing I want to highlight. On Manage Back, you will see that there is a deadline for reflections. But this is not a fixed deadline. This is not like your draft, okay? This is something you can move slightly with your supervisor, okay? So you still have to do it, and you should do it in roughly these time periods. But there is some flexibility depending on when your supervisor is available for the conversation, etc. Having said that, when you've had the conversation, your reflection should be submitted into Manage Back within a week of having that conversation. Okay, so please don't let this be something that draws on, and I will be periodically checking them just to make sure everybody's okay and on track. So the first reflection happens now, and this reflection is not about you having made amazing amounts of progress. It is just about where your thinking is at the start. The second reflection is about how you're getting to a draft point. So what actions, thoughts, processes have you gone through to get yourself towards creating the draft? The third reflection will happen after you submit the final essay, okay? And this is what we call a viva voce, okay? This is the conversation where you reflect back on your essay process and talk through how you got from the very start creating your question to a complete 4,000 word paper. All right, so keep an eye on Manage Back and Teamy for those dates, okay? But remember, there is a little bit of flexibility around those. So, things you have to do to complete the basic stages. You will have a conversation with your supervisor. This conversation will be between 15 to 25 minutes long, give or take a little bit, okay? During this conversation, you should take notes about your responses. Okay, this is really important because this conversation is going to form the basis of the reflections that you later write. All right. Some supervisors might offer to let you voice record, and you are allowed to do that, but that's a conversation to have with your supervisor. Like I said on the last slide, you will have about a week from that conversation to write your reflection. Please do not leave this hanging. You will forget key things that you've talked about, even if you've taken notes, okay? So talk to your supervisor, have that reflection conversation, and then agree on your own deadline for when you are going to have that submitted in ManageBack. Have someone who is able to hold you accountable for getting that done, okay? You're going to submit your reflection to your supervisor. This is really easy now because when you type it in ManageBack, they get a notification, okay? So by the time you've finished it, it will lock and your supervisor will be able to access it, okay? It will get a date and they'll be able to sign off. So what are we looking for though in a reflection? Like, you've got questions, you've had a conversation, but what do they actually want to give you those 6 marks? Well, the whole point of the reflection is to measure your engagement with the essay process. The examiner wants evidence that you have directly involved yourself in the research, that you understand it, that you have made key decisions, that you've been interested, okay? That they don't want to see that you've been driven through your essay by an external party. So in other words, they don't want to see evidence that, your supervisor has told you every single step, or that you kind of just opted in and spent 3 seconds doing it and aren't really interested in it. This is your chance to express your engagement. So they want to know 2 key things. They want to know what you've done, okay? And that part's easy. So the examiner is interested in the process. How did you get from having an idea to having 4,000 words? What was your thinking? What did you do? Where did it go wrong? Okay? How did you investigate? When you got stuck, how did you solve it? The other thing they're interested in is why you did it. Okay? They're interested in how you've made decisions. Why did you go with option A instead of option B? Why did you choose that resource over this resource? Why did you narrow your question this way versus that way? Okay? Now, the thing about this is that you can only explain the why if you made the decision. So weak reflections will say things like, well, I decided to do this because my supervisor said it was a good idea. And then I looked at this resource because my supervisor provided it. And then after my supervisor talked me through this, you can see where I'm going with this, right? You need to be able to explain the decisions. I decided to go down this path because. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use your supervisor guidance. You absolutely should. But what that means is if your supervisor says to you, I think it would be a really good idea if you looked at this and this. Don't just go, okay, and look at it. Ask, why is it a good idea for me to look at this? So that when you then go and discuss this in your reflection, you've got some reasoning behind it, okay? Why did you change direction in your essay? Why did you decide that interviewing this person was not going to be helpful or was going to be helpful, okay? To explain why you made a choice, you have to understand the reasoning. So what have you done? Why did you do it? And this is going to be the fundamental bones of your reflections. Now, normally at this point, this would be a live workshop and I would have a conversation. We would talk about things that people might have in their reflections. Obviously, I can't do that because this is not live. But when you go back to these slides later, you'll notice that there are some questions, okay? It's just a guide to some of the questions that can be asked during these conversations. I recommend that you have a look at them before the conversations so you know kind of what's going to be asked. The more prepared you are to answer the questions, the better the quality of the conversation, and therefore the better the quality of your notes, and the better the quality of your final reflection that you write. Okay, let's talk about bad things. So on this screen here, I have 3 not so great examples. So the first example, let's have a look at it. Over the last month, I've thought about the book To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm going to research about the author. This is a good book because I have studied it in English. Now, There are a few things wrong with this. There's lots of things wrong with this, but let's focus on a few, okay? Firstly, there's no real indication about the question. There's I've sort of just thought about this text, so maybe I'll do it. Okay, there's no passion, there's no interest, there's nothing that tells me why they thought about this. I'm going to research about the author. Okay, it's very general. You want your reflections to be specific. The key with a good reflection is to make it sound like nobody else could have written it. Okay, this could have been written by 100 different students. And lastly, this is a good book because I have studied it in English. The problem there, of course, is that you shouldn't be using things that you are studying directly in class, in the sense that if you've used it for an internal assessment purpose, you cannot use it for your essay. Let's look at example 2. After my first reflection conversation with my supervisor, I felt very confused. It is frustrating not knowing what direction I would take with my essay. This is too emotional. I hate to say it, but your examiner doesn't really care. Okay? They don't care how you feel. Now, it's okay to include comments on the fact that the process is challenging. Absolutely. But don't stop by just telling us it's challenging. Tell us how you're going to overcome the challenge. So if you want to say it's frustrating not knowing the direction, follow that with, so now I am going to look at these two options and investigate which one has more data. Okay? So give it some focus and some substance. Example number 3, I am researching space. I have picked 2 articles from Google and they will be used to support my argument. I plan to write my essay next. So this is direct and very specific on the what I did, but there's no why I did it. It's an incredibly broad statement. There's very little specificity about what this student is looking at. The level of research the student is suggesting that they're doing is really poor. Remember that this is an opportunity for you to fully engage, to show the lengths you are going to conduct your research, okay? So in order to show that, you need to be able to actually, tell us you looked at journal articles, tell us that you went to extra lengths to contact so-and-so because they were a great interview source. Highlight for the examiner how much work and effort you put into this process. So let's look at some better ones. After rereading To Kill a Mockingbird, I've decided to focus my essay on the language creating the character of Atticus Finch. I came to this conclusion after reading a review of the text by literature professor Tom Jones. Okay, this is better. This is a much better starting point because the student is suggesting that they've re-engaged, they've got something they're particularly interested in this text, they're specific about what they're going to look at, and they've identified some external reading that they've done. They're showing the examiner, I didn't just pluck it out of thin air, I looked at this and this is what I want to do, okay? And then the second example, I found the selection of my question quite challenging. Remember, it is okay to highlight that. While I was familiar with the topic of interest, I didn't really know a lot about my example. To remedy this, I've reviewed several months of news stories on the topics to identify some common trends. You've told the examiner it's hard, but then you've told them how you got creative about finding a solution. Highlight engagement, okay? You have every opportunity to get like bonus points with these reflections. So use them to tell your examiner how much work you're putting in, okay? Highlight that for them. Now, I'm going to stop here because I don't want to go on for too long, but the key takeaways from this, you only have 500 words total across the 3 reflections, so you have to use them wisely. You're going to be asked questions similar to the ones in the sample that you have. So when you're asked them, go prepared with answers. And then when you're deciding which of those answers to use in your reflection, use the ones that have substance, the ones that have specifics to you. So in this first reflection, when your supervisor asks you, how did you come to your question? If your answer is simply, well, I was interested in the topic and I'd seen something similar, that's probably not a good reflection point, okay? You can skip over that and use something else. If, however, your answer is, well, I did this study over the summer before grade 11 looking at this similar topic, and now I'm interested in taking it one step further. That's a much better, much more substantive reflection. Okay? So you're going to choose the answers that have the most substance, and they're going to be the focus of that 150 odd words that you're going to do per reflection. Like I said, if you have questions, talk to your supervisor. If you still have questions, feel free to contact me. And best of luck getting reflection 1 done.